to the degree that you want something is the degree you're afraid of not having.
Yeah. God, I wish I started when I was younger. I go, well, yeah, but you didn't. So shut the fuck up and let's keep going.
Right.
Like, you can't.
Nobody changes until they change their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. Because it's not till then that it's really real.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is way worse than I thought. It's like, oh yeah, it's way, way worse than you thought.
Yeah.
But luckily, there's more to you than you think.
Tony, how you doing, brother?
Life is good.
Yeah?
In some crazy times, life
It
is still good.
It is. We've been trying to do this for a while,
Yeah.
but things have their own divine timing, and I think it's pretty special that we get to sit down now at this time, because
Absolutely.
not only are you a person of color, you're also someone who's participated in thousands of ayahuasca ceremonies, and you're a musician, and it's just a time that's ripe for exploration and discussion. So
Yeah.
happy to be sitting down here with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for you, from the perspective that you've had, and as I just mentioned, you've participated in thousands of ceremonies, and this is kind of, in many ways, like a collective ceremony for all of humanity. So, what are some of your initial thoughts about how everything is transpiring right now?
Initially, like everyone else, there was just a cognitive dissonance around the whole thing. Trying to put it in perspective and understand what was happening, what was real, what was just, drama and reactionary. But it pretty quickly started to look like what a lot of us are now calling it, which is a really gigantic purge, right? In that context, very similar to a ceremony, And given the context of, let's say, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the fact that it was coming on the tail end and in the midst of this pandemic, which already had everyone on edge, and in a lot of ways, appropriately had a lot of people doing a lot of deep internal self-inquiry because they were isolated, needed to. And then this fuse was lit. And although it has been uncomfortable in a lot of ways, I've been really grateful, like a lot of people, that this suppressed conversation that needs to happen in this country at all times is finally being had in a very loud way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In such a way that people can't ignore it. And
Exactly.
I think that's the beautiful part of this. And then to see how many people, like if I look at the beautiful side of this, it's how many people are having to take a real introspective look at what's inside them. And over you see like the root of everything is real kind of love and a real unity that's forming. And sometimes some of the shadow expressions are divisive and my tribe versus your tribe. And that's some of the shadow that's obviously coming up in any purge or in any ceremony. But if you look like a little deeper and from a little higher purview, perhaps, it's like, wow, this is fucking beautiful.
Yeah, I have to say, and it's something that you can't always say publicly, is the kind of silver lining of the whole thing, because a lot of people, it's too early to hear that, right? They really want to be in the intensity of the confrontation, and I understand that. It's cathartic and it's very important. And at the same time, as you're just saying, it's so beautiful to see what's coming out of it already, to see so many. I live in Atwater Village, small town here, in LA County, right? Mostly white for sure, but very diverse. And I went to the farmer's market last weekend, and I hear this bagpipe coming down the street, and I was like, whoa, right? Because I did the genealogy test, and on my father's side, it turns out I'm 40% Irish Scottish, but it's mixed.
Shit, you could have fucking taken a guest appearance on that bagpipe. You could have just figured it out from pure DNA alone.
Exactly. So it definitely woke up the DNA, and I'm looking down the street and like, wow, that's so cool. And then as it gets closer, I realized they were my neighbors, right? All white, mostly families, more than maybe 20 of them. And they were all carrying Black Lives Matter banners.
Yeah.
Right.
And playing the bagpipes.
And playing bagpipes.
How fucking cool.
And really only doing that for their neighborhood on that main street where all the restaurants and businesses were. And as they were passing, I had this suddenly overwhelming, I'm the only Black person on the street, actually. So on top of this being beautiful, it suddenly hit me which has been kind of the story of my life, and a lot of Black people like me, like always being like the only Black person in the room kind of story. When that moment, it felt like all eyes are on me to see how I'm going to react to my neighbors doing their Black Lives Matter parade with the bagpipes, and I just stood there and did the kind of namaste prayer thing, and I actually started crying because it was so beautiful. Yeah. And they kind of passed and kept going, and I just had to stand there for a minute, because in that moment, something that a lot of us understand intellectually really hit me as a somatic, visceral experience that I wish my mother had lived to see that. Right? Yeah. That suddenly, and like here I am on this street that is predominantly white, being supported by white people, right? And people driving by and honking their horns, and they were applauding. And so the depth of what was possible for the entire country in that moment really hit me,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the responsibility of being a person of color at this time the best way to say it, I would think, is to maybe seize the moment, as opposed to violent reactions that are purely from an emotional, reactionary place. As Martin Luther King, I'm sure would say, like, how do we seize this moment and bend it towards justice? Yeah. So that was a beautiful moment. And from that point on, I was much more beyond just intellectually interested in everything that was going on. I felt it on a daily basis. Yeah, it was like I let it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a narrative that is being pushed, I think, subconsciously by individuals, and maybe perhaps even consciously by some of the media outlets, that's creating this idea of us versus them, this idea of divisiveness. And surely there's those elements that are there. They're not making them up. They're not magically creating them. But the real thing that's happening is a lot more unity than I think people really recognize. I mean, if you look at what's happening with the marches in Hollywood and all around the country, all around the world, you're seeing like a real sign of people coming together and saying, enough is enough. We've had enough fucking injustice. We've had enough fucking racism. Like, let's expose this and then make the changes necessary and get beyond this. And I think that's the thing that gets me really excited. And it is still really early. But I think for someone like us who've had a lot of experience in ceremony, these purges we can see as like, this is going to be productive. Even if it's violent vomiting and puking and yelling and crying and all of the things that kind of come out of this, on the other side of this catharsis is the opportunity for massive healing.
Yeah, I mean, beautifully said. And, the age-old story about the media, being very selective in how they report, and it looks like it's slanted towards the violence. Well, there's a lot of violence happening, but the compassion and the unity and the togetherness that has been taking place on the streets. And I know because a lot of my friends are involved in it, far, far, far outpaces anything that's negative and violent. And as we know, most of the violence has been, police pushback anyway, or some of the white supremacists that infiltrate the marches, whatever. Very, very little of the violence has actually come from looters, and certainly not from Antifa or Black Lives Matter people. Yeah.
It's interesting that we have these narratives that are being pushed through these traditional media channels and different places that we have to just be a little bit suspect of. We have to understand that no matter what it is, whether they're talking about COVID and they want you to watch, the goal of so many of these organizations is just keep you watching the fucking news. Like over and over, like what's going to get you to watch the news? Well, let's put the most provocative thing that we possibly can that's going to get you emotionally
with
attached.
The equivalent of a news clickbait,
Exactly.
Yeah. You bring up something that's really, I think, so important during this time period. And a lot of people are starting to see through the manipulation. It's not always that it's some insidious, agenda, right, that the media is pushing. I think oftentimes it's what you're bringing up. It's just sensational, and it's what they think people want to see and what will bring ratings up. And on occasion, we've seen definitely that the media being used as a mouthpiece to forward some kind of agenda. But by and large, I think they know that human beings are attracted to drama, and they keep feeding it to us.
I mean, look at reality television, right?
Precisely.
Look at anything that's there. I mean, all of these things that someone say, oh, look at this conspiracy and look at this plot. What about simple self-interest?
Yeah.
Simple self-interest can explain a lot, and simple self-interest on the behalf of some of these media organizations is, all right, what's going to get people watching the fucking news?
Yeah. And this idea, putting that in the context of like the Black Lives Matter movement, and what's happening in the world with, conspiracies, like freaking everybody out that, somehow they're going to, that your interest in a conspiracy theory, particularly on social media, will literally equate to people dying, And I think it's a necessary conversation, but it's so blown out of proportion, particularly in this context. And I was just sharing this with some friends the other night that, sometimes shit just happens, like,
Yeah.
and it's like, and it's not
in
that
ayahuasca ceremonies, literally shit just happens
Exactly,
sometimes.
yeah.
Like, damn, oh
Yeah, and
no,
it's like,
what do I do now?
This series of events unfolded and that resulted in George Floyd being where he was and getting killed. And it doesn't mean that there were some people behind the strings that got together with George 5 years ago and said, okay, on this date, we're going to have you're going to have to sacrifice, man, because we have this whole agenda that we want to push. Right. Certainly, I think anything, and I bring this up because COVID is now being considered by a lot to be part of this kind of, conspiracy agenda,
Yeah, it's a weird thing because there's COVID that's happening and there's tons of conspiracy theories about that.
around
And then
that.
this happened. And to me, it was like, well, this wasn't according to plan. And then the
That's what I
conspiracy
felt
theories are
like.
like, oh,
yes, it
contraire,
was.
mon frère. This is
Exactly.
exactly the plan that they were looking for. I was like, no fucking way this is the plan. This is
Yeah.
way too random.
I had a friend post recently, like, and bless her heart, she's an amazing being, so she'll know I'm talking about her. But she posted, some things about George Floyd, and then I don't know, it seems suspicious to me, right? And I get it. I'm like, well, suspicious versus coincidental or weird, just weird, But that said, in all seriousness, the thing is that, of course, anything, the pandemic, Black Lives Matter movement, all of it can be co-opted once in effect. And I think be used to try to push maybe some narrative or agenda. But that doesn't mean that there is a conspiracy to begin with. And I think that's where the two are collapsing and getting a lot of people wigged out, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, it's this idea that, all right, there are anarchists. There are people who want just anarchy and chaos. And those may be outside forces, other different nations or organizations, or maybe internal forces that just kind of want this chaos because they're angry, they're frustrated, or they have some idea. And this is an opportunity for them to be opportunistic, like we were talking about earlier. Just be opportunistic like humans have been for our whole evolution for tens of thousands of years. If we had an opportunity, we would take it. And I think different organizations are going to see an opportunity here and they're going to take it. But it doesn't mean it's part of some massive, conspiracy. It's just, okay, this is now what's in play. This is the game board that we have now. How do I advance my piece on this
board? Exactly. And the interesting thing about that, the obvious thing is that all sides are doing it. Every group involved, from the government to Antifa, just about every organization, including, climate activists, they're all utilizing the moment to push their agenda forward. And why wouldn't you, right, from what you're saying? So that's distinct from there being a covert kind of very strategic, well-organized conspiracy on any part of any of those groups. Right? Yeah. Some may be better at it than others, because I think they're more prepared and have more resources available, But the whole thing is, it would be very disturbing to me if it weren't for my experience with ayahuasca and ceremony and watching the cathartic arc that people go through individually, or that an entire group in a ceremony can go through. Because as you know, we're watching that exact same process unfold on a national, if not global scale.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's for people who haven't been in ceremony and they don't understand the healing process, they might say like, why is all this happening? What is going on? But when you understand the healing arc, that certain things in the midst of healing, when you're in that middle zone, it's not pretty. It's not, you don't exactly hit the sweet spot, and I've watched this many times in ceremony with myself and with other people, is you may know that ultimately you're going to land at forgiveness, and that's where the healing rests.
Right.
But if you try to rush through the anger and through the
spiritual bypass,
all of that, if you try to rush through that, like you're making a mistake. You can't rush through it. You have to go through all of the things and all of these feelings that people have had, this repressed anger, this repressed frustration, all of this. It's gotta be let out, and hopefully, you keep the rails on a little bit to prevent it from, creating more damage that you also have to heal from later. But it's all productive when you look at it from that perspective.
It really is. One of the foundational truths of healing trauma is that, as you know, you have to go into the trauma. The only way out of trauma is back in, but with a new cognition of it, a new relationship to it. In the context of ayahuasca ceremonies, that's true of all the aspects of healing. I often say in the context of ceremony that you can't let go of what you don't first hold, period, right? You have to, that thing has to come up. It needs to be sat with uncomfortably or sometimes violently, right? For as long as is necessary, right? And then there's the process of being willing to let it go. And hopefully the forgiveness, the final piece of that, like forgiving yourself, forgiving the situation, the perpetrator, what's that word? Perpetrator, yeah. So just this process of forgiveness, because it's like the final piece of like, this is no longer in my field.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And, something that comes up very, very often with ceremony work around this idea of forgiveness. And people get it intellectually, but there's an amazing moment when they realize something that they've heard before is true, that forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for you, right? And I found over the years that's why people have so much trouble with the idea of forgiveness. They feel like forgiving is condoning the behavior, letting the person off the hook, They go, no, the forgiveness is so you can get on with it, Yeah. I'm quoted often as saying, at some point in ceremony, it's like, forgive yourself, forgive everyone else, and get on with the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah, that anger that you hold is not actually hurting somebody else. We have this misguided, cognitive perception that if I'm angry, it's punishing them.
Exactly.
It's not.
I'm never going to forgive them.
It's punishing you, know, and it's like we feel like that by us energetically creating the distance that anger allows us to create, which is important as a temporary step oftentimes. But that's going to continue to hurt the other person.
Right.
Maybe sometimes in personal relationships it will, if your friend's really angry at you and not speaking to you or certain things, I've been involved in a lot of those situations.
Sure.
And it does hurt a little bit, for sure. But ultimately holding that anger hurts you. And the longer you hold it, and especially if you're holding it to the collective holding it universally, it's not going to allow you to actually live the freest, fullest expression of who you are. In some ways, it's actually going to be, you're going to be stuck. You're going to be trapped in your own anger construct.
And I think modern psychology, psychiatry, mental health, the world understands that. But it is an amazing experience to watch it happen in people's lives in medicine, plant medicine work. The liberation on the other side of just letting go of resentment and pain, emotional pain, being held on to. I've watched people after one ceremony, and they come back because they've got other things to work on. But the week following a ceremony, send me an email saying something like, I didn't even know that I had this much liberation available, meaning I had no idea that I was that oppressed within my own, mental construct or emotional psyche terrain, whatever it is. And suddenly this one little thing lifts and it's like the floodgate, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it's like that feeling of when you're in love, and suddenly the world is beautiful again, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're looking from a radically different lens. It's, as someone who's participated in so many different ceremonies and even facilitated, quite hundreds of ceremonies yourself, this perspective is something that I think even psychologists, we can understand it, but to see it and to know what's happening in the individual can also happen in the collective. And that's that's the good clue. Yeah. I think it's, do you have any particular instances, maybe in your own experience or in, experiences that you've facilitated where you've watched this healing arc, and see the examples of how somebody moves through some trauma and some repressed feelings?
Well, hundreds, of course, relevant to what you're just saying, the ones that really stand out are the ones that ripple out from the ceremony into community, where, a community that has been at odds or in some kind of confrontation for a long period of time, or maybe has completely imploded, sometimes exploded and moved apart. And then one person in ceremony has a realization about their participation in the whole thing, right? And starts to make these deeper connections like, oh, actually, that was definitely my wounded child reacting to, oh, I was triggered. Well, if I go back, wow, that was actually my grandmother. Whoa, that was actually her grandmother. And then the ancestral, unfolding. That I've seen several really amazing unfoldings, we'll just call it, of that one person getting that and then reaching out the next day and wanting to apologize or bring some clarity. And before you know it, the entire community has been healed.
Yeah.
You know, and the process is similar to what we're just sharing. That there's the interesting thing about the healing process of plant medicine, in this case specifically ayahuasca. And you're familiar with this, I'm sure. The most common thing I hear people say about why they don't do it is they're afraid of what will come up. Mm-hmm. Meaning you already know that there's shit to come up, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, why would you be afraid?
Exactly. So they come in already know, right? And then there's this whole, like, I'm here to be healed, but the whole time you're like, I'm holding on to the stuff that wants to come up to be healed. And so, it's a humorous kind of place for myself and my crew, the co-facilitators, to watch people suffer in ceremony and really have a difficult time, mainly because they're avoiding the thing they came there for. Right. So usually then suddenly there's a breakthrough and the floodgates open and the thing comes and it can be, shared in any number of ways, but typically it's like, oh my God, oh no, it's true, whatever it is, right? Or I'm such a bad person, whatever it is. And then there's, the uncomfort and kind of running from that. And then always there's this moment when you see that they relax into it.
Yeah.
And realize that actually it can be let go of. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't have to define you. You don't have to take it forward into the next 7 generations, whatever it is. And you can go back into your community or family, whatever it is, and actually heal the thing. Right? Yeah. And I see that happening, in a lot of communities relative to the time period that we're now, that this is happening,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing that you bring up, how people have they have an idea that they know something, but they're really afraid to explore it. Another reason that I've had people say they're afraid of ceremony is they're in some kind of career. And let's say they're a stockbroker or something like that. Like, I don't want to do ayahuasca. What if it tells me I shouldn't be a stockbroker?
Yeah, then you're already thinking that
exactly. Like, if you were confident in what you're doing, you'd be like, okay, great. There's this idea that it's going to tell you something that isn't already coming from you. But I think people already deep down know that this is maybe something that they're grappling with.
Happens all the time. I'm almost verbatim, what you just shared. I've met some people, we're talking about ayahuasca, and this comes up in what I do. Like on this plane ride once, this guy was like, yeah, I've heard about it and I've been really thinking about it, but, I don't remember what his career was, but he said exactly what you did. But, I'm afraid if I did that I'd get derailed from this thing that I probably shouldn't be doing anyway. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're so attached to our identity around certain things and so inflexible with what we want to change.
It's the foundation of the work with plant medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Breaking over-identification with, the mystics would say with form, but with story, identification of, self-story, family, neighborhood, country, whatever it is, it all comes crashing down. And what I find with most people is that's the real foundations of their fear, right? One of my teachers I sat with years ago, Gangaji, talked about this, that one of the reasons the ego is so self-destructive when left to its own devices is because it ultimately knows it's not real.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it always knows that the whole thing is bullshit and that it's a lie. So it's doing everything possible to kind of keep itself, from the veil being lifted on the fact that the whole thing is a sham. Right? So there's a part of us, I think, intuitively that knows going into a plant medicine ceremony, like the whole thing could be like ripped apart, And so that is interpreted as an ego death, right? So the death experience people are so afraid of in ayahuasca, like no one's ever died from ayahuasca. And to clarify...
Well, a few maybe.
Well, to clarify, I always have to. People have died in ayahuasca ceremonies and related. To date, no one has died because of the medicine ayahuasca was in their system, right? It's been things that are related. And I've checked, right?
So it's some kind of other drug that they were on or some kind of other
it's either a contraindication or really bad practice.
Yeah.
Right? And in a couple of cases, there was like an allergic reaction to an admixture. It wasn't the ayahuasca vine and leaf, which is the traditional ingredients. Sure. In one case, the curandero mixed in Toei, which is, here, Datura, Prince Mainstay. Yeah. And the young man had an allergic reaction to it. And unfortunately had been given permission to go, as far as I think this is fairly accurate. He was given permission to go back to his little tambo cabin, and he actually choked in his own vomit. So it wasn't from the ayahuasca itself, right? And one guy, this is a relatively recent one, he was there to be healed from something that he was taking medications for. The curandero shaman actually told him, this is one of the substances that's not okay, no bueno, with ayahuasca. But he insisted that he had done his research and it was okay. And he sure enough died in the ceremony.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think going back to what you're saying though about the ego death. I mean, one thing. So I asked one of my spiritual mentors, Paul Selig. I asked if the ego itself could be considered an entity, could be considered like a life form.
Yeah.
And he was like, yes,
Certainly.
actually, it could be. So if you look at the prerogative and the directive of every life form, it's to survive.
Absolutely.
And if the ego only survives by our belief and our identification with it, then in its effort to simply survive, it's going to do everything it can to keep us in the ego, keep us believing in the ego. So if that means throwing your whole life into chaos, because when we're in fear, then we're going to rely on our ego, our trusted friend, our companion in all things. Our ego is going to figure this out. We're going to
fight or flight survival.
So in that
programming.
case, the ego is really active. It's really present. So it's thriving. Even if your life is going to shambles, your ego is alive, which is its primary directive. Well, if you get really still, if you're in ceremony, if you're allowing that to release, it's kind of the dissolution, the dissolving of this entity. And that fear of death is going to cause it to go, no way. Like straight into something that's going to scare you.
And bringing this back to what, you opened with, what we're watching on the global scale is that exact process, I feel. A lot of people have commented on this, that if you, I'm not saying that it is, because I'm not qualified to, but if we are watching the last days of an empire, right? If democracy / capitalism is collapsing, right? Or a particular way of life that certain people have bought into, it is a similar process of my entire identity is now being attacked, right? And you liberals are the reason why, or you black people are the reason why, or you police are, you white supremacists are. And I feel this is what we're watching are these identity structures, on a tribal or global scale that have a real, probably, valid concern that, the gig is up, right? And it's time to transition. So like you're saying, they're going to do everything possible. These last thrashes about, I had this ceremony once and I saw, it was like witnessing the United States and capitalism, not conceptually, but as it's actually practiced in the oil industry. It was this beautiful, ironic metaphor of seeing the whole thing represented as a dinosaur in the tar pits. So he's going down, but he's thrashing about, and
the tail with the spikes,
exactly,
and the horns, and
it's like, I'm going to do everything and throwing tar and shit everywhere, and either way you're sinking, right? Yeah. But as you were saying, it's programmed, it has to survive. So I feel like, well, of course it's going to trash about. It's not going to go, well, tar, all right.
Now is my time.
Exactly.
I'm ready for this
Let
ceremony.
me just sink into
my
this.
life. This is like taking off an old shoe, like Ram Dass said. They said the ego never.
Right.
The ego's like, fuck you.
Exactly.
I'm going to be here forever. Yeah. It's interesting. I actually have a theory. I don't know whether I believe in ghosts or this kind of idea, but all of the reports and accounts about ghosts is they're kind of like, they're not particularly conscious, and they're kind of like assholes. They're just kind of stuck in this thing. They're kind of haunting bothering people. I often wondered, if that phenomenon is real, and of course I haven't had any direct experiences, so I only really believe the things I have direct experiences about. If that is real, perhaps there's a certain way that at death, the consciousness, the unborn, the undying, what you might call the soul, transitions and goes off to the discarnate place where it goes off, an experience that I think a lot of us have had on medicine. Perhaps maybe the ego at that point is such a strong body and with such vigor and adherence to its construct, maybe it just separates. And maybe it just becomes this entity.
Well, they call it the hungry ghost.
Yeah, and this idea that you can remind these ghosts, in quotes, you can remind these ghosts to just go to the light. Well, what is the light? Light's the place where you go back into the unicity, back into the all. It's a dissolving.
Exactly.
And this construct is suffering. These ghosts are suffering. Clearly they're suffering. You wouldn't try and torture people and like haunt them if you weren't in pain yourself. Pain creates the desire to create more pain. So it's like this idea, like these constructs aren't really real. And the best thing we can do is just help them, nurture them back to a place, ultimately maybe back to the light and completion, but also in the meantime, while they're actually a part of us and we're never going to get rid of them completely, let's just nourish them and kind of lighten their load, push a little love, push a little light in there, push a little forgiveness in there, and just allow them to like release their hold.
That's a rather traditional approach shamanism takes to meeting less than benevolent beings, right? And these dimensions that you can traverse in ceremony is to not give over to your fear of them, right? And your whole story about that, but instead just to meet them with love, right? Particularly your own quote unquote demons, right? Which, you were saying earlier, you can see the demons as just thought forms or aspects of your ego that show up, because they always have some aspect of you. I find they wouldn't even show up otherwise.
Right.
And
you could actually look at everything as all you, which is like an interesting part. Like as
let's
within,
have that conversation.
As within, so
we?
without. Right.
Cut through everything else, and like oftentimes with ceremony, I share this with people. Like in the same way that when you have a dream, everyone in the dream is you. That's an echo, certainly, of a way to live one's life. But certainly in ceremony, is that both the light and the dark are equally valid teachers. Don't push any away. Like just become the witness of the teaching of, the entire show, really. Because then the arc it can take you on. Of watching all these aspects of self, cathartically kind of show up and do their thing and dissolve. That's the bigger teaching. And it's something you can take into your life. Yeah, and those ghosts and the beings and the demons, I love in Buddhism this concept of the bardos, like really your whole life is preparing for death. And the foundation of that, really, I think the pearl of that teaching is that you're not really living until you face your mortality, right? When you really get that you're going to die at some point is when you can really take on life, right? Because you see how precious it is and you go for it. And somewhere in that teaching, what they're basically saying is beings that aren't prepared, like you're saying, the ego's so attached to its identity, not willing to maybe dissolve into the unity, they can just hang out in those realms, right? So some of the ayahuasqueros would say that those are the beings that you're meeting. These are beings that are stagnant, that don't actually continue on with their kind of evolutionary course back towards unity, right? So they just kind of hang out and I think, like anything in that consciousness, you would become pathologically stagnant.
Right? Stuck in a loop.
Yeah.
Just stuck in a loop where there's just no growth. And then having that application of love, perhaps, even for some intentional love, can actually blast them out of this little circle, where they're stuck in this cycle. And just like, oh, whoa, love, something loves me. Like, whoa, wait, what am I doing? Maybe I am love. Oh shit. All right. Like I'm done with this loop. I'm done with this cycle.
And I've met people like that, over the years that it's a kind of common experience. If someone will share something along this lines that throughout the whole ceremony, they felt separate, and but then they realized that was their medicine, because it became clear to them, like, I don't feel like I belong in the world, right? I don't have a lot of friends. And then this whole story, and they suddenly realized, but the reason why is because I have this, self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling, prophetic thought that I'm separate, I'm alone, people don't like me, right? I'm separate, and it just keeps going and going and going. And then suddenly in ceremony, they realize that they're part of a group, and that, one little act of kindness, like the person loves me, and then the whole thing comes falling down, like the facade of it. Yeah, this one guy just cried. I'll never forget this one. His name was Craig, and he would want it to be known. And he's a war veteran, amongst other things. And we had to go through all kinds of checklists to make sure it was going to be safe for him to be in ceremony. So he passed. So he's in ceremony, and he's kind of mostly still the whole time. Some sighing every now and then. But I remember thinking, not much is happening, but I'm really glad that he at least got to experience it. After ceremony, we're doing the sharing circle, And we get to him and he says, my name is Craig. And I just want you to know that I have been alone for the last 50 years. And tonight I feel like I have a family.
Wow.
Right? That's all he needed.
Game changer.
Yeah, absolute game changer. He's came to, well, they were difficult to get to for a bunch of logistical reasons, but he was in every ceremony they could be from that point on. And interesting enough, he said two things that were beautiful. One was his main reason for coming wasn't so much the ceremony at that point. It was because he had finally felt part of a community and a group. But something that was really beautiful for the younger people to hear when we were sharing our intentions in the beginning, like, why are you here? Each ceremony, he would say, well, I'm at a different place than young people. I'm like 70 now, 71, and I'm not doing so well. So I'm kind of like preparing myself for the next stage of the journey. That's what I'm doing in these works. And it was just really beautiful, like to hear this, the gamut, you know, of like, there were some younger people that were like literally preparing for how to live their life in their future. And he was preparing for how to exit in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, you know, the ceremony is such a beautiful thing that people go through because you may arrive and you may notice all of the differences, you know, okay, this is a woman, this is a man, this is this age, this is this color, this is this, you know, and just notice all of these different attributes. But when you're in ceremony, all of that evaporates.
Dissolves.
And then anything that and when you're in the sharing circles, which happen afterwards, you don't hear any of that. You know, it's just human beings. You see their soul, you see their kind of the innate humanness of who they are that just emerges, and you stop having all of these judgments about like what this person is. And usually most of the truth, it's really remarkable to me. Everyone I've got to, I've never heard anybody in a sharing circle say something that they got on the medicine and been like, what the hell was that? You know, it's always like,
I mean, you might 3 weeks later.
It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, it's all pointing towards these universals, which really bond people and bring
my
them together.
My favorite part of the ceremony experience is the sharing circles, which is just the post-integration process. You know, we often joke that we should do the before and afters, you know, because everybody enters the ceremony all separate in their worlds. And as you know, by sharing circle, it's like, I love you, right? I mean, they like you said, all of a sudden they realize that all the barriers were just mental constructs in their head, you know, and that you literally could fall in love with every single person in the room if you were open to it, right? And then even your fear around what that means. What does that mean, fall in love? But like all of it just starts to go in ceremony, you know? I think it's why it's so challenging for a lot of people. I don't think a lot of us have an idea of what it would be like to live your day-to-day without really hardwired survival strategy programming in place, right? Like, what would it really look like if you let that go and just walked out into the street and started saying hello to people, right? Because there's interesting phenomenon in some of the work that I was doing early on with conflict mediation. And one of the exercises, you know, in a lot of spiritual traditions too, is this just kind of looking people in the eye and various, you know, configurations of this. One of the names for it is darshan. It's like anytime you see the deeper reality behind what you're looking at is darshan. It's like true sight, right? So the phenomenon is that you get a group of people together that don't even know each other, or maybe they don't like each other. And what we discover is if you get them to actually like chill and look at each other in the eyes for a while, and you ask them later, like, what was the actual fear and concern? It's because they realize they start falling in love with the person. It's true, right? And it freaks them out. Right? It's like, oh no. So you start making up all kinds of other stories, you know, to like somehow mask what feels like it's not okay because of your conditioning to fall in love with the person in front of you. Like, what does that mean? You know, I always tell them, I go fall in love. You know, like,
there's some idea that, you know, love is scary. Love hurts. And I think it's not actually the love that's actually hurting anything. It's our attachment to a specific source of love, you know, that hurts. You love somebody and then that person decides they want to create separation through anger or through removal. And then you feel the pain because that source of love is gone. And then sometimes you internalize it as your own fault. And then there's the guilt and the shame. But it's never the love. The love always feels good.
Yeah. Several people have mentioned this. I most recently heard Jason Silva speak to it in one of his amazing rants, that one of the phenomena is that love and fear always rise simultaneously, you know, and for that very reason, because typically and I've just, my own kind of self-inquiry, I've seen this happen many times. The initial euphoric, like, I'm in love with this person, is followed almost immediately by, but what if they don't like me back? Or it's going to go away, right? Well, it's not going to last forever, right?
Yep.
And for some people, those actually become reasons for not falling in love. The idea that it might one day end is a valid justification for not loving at all. It's like, well, then as the Buddhists say, it's going to bring us back to the foundational fear, which is fear of death, right? In this context, meaning impermanence, right? Western people particularly have a lot of trouble with this idea that things are not permanent, right? And it shows up certainly in the context of relationships and falling in love. It's like, I love you. What does that mean? It's like, well, you're going to hurt me. You're going to go away. It's like, well, one day this love won't be here. Like, well, what if it doesn't work out? Like the neurotic, wanting to attain something beautiful and hold on to it forever, when all of nature, all of the cosmos is showing us the contrary.
Can't hold on to anything. I think that's one of the things I realized. I did a 6-day isolation in absolute darkness, absolute silence, absolute isolation. And during that period, one of the biggest things I had to confront was there was an aspect that was keeping me from loving life to the absolute fullest and really like enjoying life and being happy and enjoying all the sights and the sounds and the connections and the people and everything, because I knew I was going to die and I knew I had to give it back. And so if I didn't really love life that much, if I die, so what?
Exactly. It won't hurt so bad.
Won't hurt so bad. And also I have this belief, I kind of feel like I know where I'm going when I die. I've been there. I've traveled to those places, those lokas, those planes of existence that are disembodied. So there's even less fear, about that. But what was it? What was the real fear? Well, the real fear was letting go of all of these things that I love, letting go of my life, letting go of all of the beauty that's around me. So I wasn't allowing myself to fully engage with it. And I still struggle with that. It's still a challenge.
My friends, or certainly the people that I've been a facilitator to, or in their context, like a spiritual, like mentor in some ways, it's something that I have to remind them of what you just said. It's like, look, there's moments when I'm definitely in an experience of, wow, I spent a lifetime cultivating this Tony Mouse avatar thing, right? Like, I like my talents and what I'm up to, and I love what I love, and I love my plants, and I love the cat and the fish, and then like the cat died last year, completely ripped my heart apart, right? And I was right in that story like everybody else. It's like, it's okay to mourn the loss of my cat, right? It's a friend. And to have the understanding that everything will fade away eventually, right? And then it's another step to just really accept the fact that you, as you know yourself now, will not exist at some point, right? But for me, that really is, as the Buddhists are saying, that's a reason to completely celebrate yourself, right? It's like to just go for it. It's like make mistakes, call people out, do your thing, just make a mess, right? And always leaning towards, of course, the love and unity, but to just fully embrace your humanity. I feel like at this point in my own personal evolution, that's the whole point of the human experience, right? It's not to be a spiritual being, it's like you already are. It's to be a human being. Yeah. And I feel like the more we can embrace our humanity and see what's possible, the more outstanding the whole game could be.
Yeah. And that's the thing. When you really get it and you really understand that memento mori, remember that you're going to die, that old Stoic belief and all of these, you see them in so many different traditions from philosophies and religions. And this idea that, all right, I'm going to die. So what am I going to do? I have to let it all go anyway. So am I going to just play it safe and stay on the shores and not really enjoy everything? So that moment is less scary? Or am I going to just live so full that when my time comes and I see that, minute hand going around and I know when it gets to 12 that I'm done, that I'm going to have a fucking wicked smile on my face.
And you'll be like the Native Americans saying, this is a good day to die.
Hoka, hey.
Yeah, right?
And that's been my guide star, is like to really feel like today is a good day to die because I've lived so fucking full, full.
Yeah. I mean, even these little small ways, like I remember being in one of the study trips we took to Peru, a beautiful young lady, a sister on the trip, and the Shipibo brought out all their tapestries to share and sell as they do. And this one was like like Picasso, like gorgeous, like the Michelangelo of Shipibo tapestries. And she clearly wanted it. She was absolutely in love with it. She could afford it, no problem. And she's holding it up. It's like in her hands, right? And then there was this thing you could see the moment when it happened, like some story crept in of maybe not deserving or doubt that she could have what she wanted. So she folded it up and then she kind of put it on the pile. Meanwhile, there's a guy that really wanted it. So once she put it down, he's like, great, it's mine, right?
Yeah.
So she spent the whole next week being upset that he bought her tapestry. And at a certain time, I'm like, you know what actually happened there, right? This is like, I know you, and this is your life story. It's like feeling somehow that you don't deserve what you actually want, and then being upset that he didn't do anything, you know? So I'm seeing this and all the little ways that people ultimately are trying to put off death, like play it really safe, like as if that strategy is going to work, you know, like, yeah, well, since I'm eventually going to die at some point, maybe I'll just kind of be lukewarm the whole journey, like you said. So when I get to the end, maybe it won't be so bad. I'm like, no, the only thing that's going to make it okay is that you fucking lived.
That's it. That's it. Because that moment.
Like my friend said, slide in the home base, dirty.
For sure.
Scrape your knees and
because imagine the horror. Imagine the horror of being in your final moments, which could come sooner than later. We never know. And just imagine the horror of looking back and going like, fuck, I played it safe and here I am, I'm going to die anyways. Yeah. You know, I mean, that's the
or that you spent all your attention on being beautiful and preserving your body only to be on your deathbed and be like, oh, doesn't matter much.
Yeah.
Not that you shouldn't go for it and be healthy and fit. I'm just saying, like, if that's your priority, you know, above all else, right? Then it's a skewed way, like where your access point for your center for how to live and navigate your life is particularly thrown off by materialism in any form, right? Yeah, the not being healthy because you know it's a good way to live, or I'm gonna take on life extension and looking beautiful just for the experience of it, and I want to fulfill my complete potential. Like all those things are fine. More often than not, it's people actually thinking that they're going to put off the inevitable if they do it. Right?
Well, you're investing in the thing that you're ultimately having to release. Like the more we invest in our identity and the less we invest in our spiritual reality, the unborn and the undying aspect of us, the more we're going to be disappointed because we're putting all of our investment into this thing that's going to evaporate.
And the more the way, you know, going back to our larger conversation, the more the world will continue to have the types of confrontations that we're seeing, you know. Yeah, I think about this often, and I share it occasionally with a ceremonial group if it's appropriate, you know, that we're all locked on a particular, basically our lives are just habitual, right? The way that we see global politics, you know, what's happening in the United States, these confrontations, they're just ways of being that are just habitual. In reality, the entire thing could change on a dime. You know, literally tomorrow, a percentage of people could wake up and go, this is fucking crazy. I don't want to do this shit anymore. You know, it's that Burning Man out here, right? Like, yeah, and I've thought about like, what would life look like if you got up every morning and instead of thinking about how you could, you know, better yourself, make more money, advance your project, you would wake up with like, what can I bring to life today? You know?
Right.
And it is like going to Burning Man. It's like, what awesome thing can I contribute to the party, right? Yeah. And I know a lot of people that live that way. I'm sure you do too. And I think this is actually a reality that's possible. You know, most people could wake up not into a survival mode, but into a what can I contribute to the world mode. Like life is so freaking awesome. There's so much infinite possibility. You know, I don't want to be known for being the richest person in the world. I want to be known for the guy that brought the best idea possible to the table, you know? Like,
yeah, and if you start investing in how much you can make the whole game better for everybody,
yeah,
you know, like
that's real fun.
That's real fun.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that's going to constantly fill your cup. And there's tons of studies that show that one of the best ways to get out of depression or get out of this kind of self-centric world construct that we're in is to just start giving.
Yeah.
You know, just start giving as much as you can, joy, happiness, love, comfort, anything you can to as many people as possible. And you're going to feel different.
When people contact me and they want support with, you know, depression, they can't get out of it, I always say the same thing. Well, when in doubt, put yourself in service because it works every single time, right? It's like, what does that mean? I go, well, it's like, I can't make you undepressed, but what I can do is let you know from experience that if you go put yourself into service, your life will be not about inside your head anymore. It will be about what's happening out here, right?
Yeah.
And what you can bring and how you can affect other people. And every single time, with no exception, someone who actually was able to hear that and take it on, that was the best advice possible, right? And I didn't make it up. I got it from variations on things like you just shared. But it's true. I find we get so trapped in our heads. One of the beautiful things about plant medicine, ayahuasca in particular, is that it initially, starts this conversation in the head, right? In a way that it's just revealing to you your internal process. Then it creates this observer. You suddenly realize you're observing this crazy monkey mind of your own, right? And then it suddenly kind of starts opening up into, Pachamama, the world, the cosmos. And you start to realize a lot of people do. It's like, oh, this has all just been me in my head and my worldview. I'm actually not living in the real world, right? I've been living in my thoughts and judgments and biases. And it's really profound. And again, what we're seeing, I would like to think is what's happening certainly nationally, if not globally, that a lot of people are starting to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Looking at the New York Times bestseller list this week, and I think it was like 17 of 18 were all books on like racism, Black Lives Matter. And I've had some white friends of mine telling me too that it never dawned on them to read those books because why would they? Because they're really not racist, right? And they're not. Mm-hmm. However, that doesn't mean that they have an understanding of systemic racism, the culture of it, what it actually means, where it comes from. And what most of them has shared with me was, what I got from that I wasn't expecting was seeing the world from your perspective for the first time. Yeah.
Taking a real walk in your shoes.
Exactly. And understanding what it feels like to be you. And I was sharing with a friend recently that, as I mentioned, I live in Atwater Village and I run every night. Usually it's a brisk walk. Right? So I'm out there and I said, it's interesting that you guys all perceive me almost as being quote unquote not Black, right? Because you don't associate me with what your ideas of Blackness are, right? And the stereotypes of that. However, I go, when I run at night, I have to be careful about where I run and what I wear. So this is a reality that you guys aren't aware of, right? It's like, if you're Black in America, you know it and you better be aware of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really hard to even put yourself in that perspective unless you go through the intentional process of really doing it and really our imagination is very powerful. That's one of the tools that we have as humans, but we have to actually activate it and access it and imagine it. Because I can think of a time recently, maybe 2.5, 3 months ago. So I'm pulling out of my driveway and I'm making a left turn, and up near my driveway, or the street that's that my house is on, there's a hill, and there's a hill to the left of me, and I'm making a left turn. And so if there's a car coming up the hill, it's hard to see. So, because it's kind of hidden because of the incline. So I pull out and I see a car coming. So I accelerate a little bit to make sure that I have plenty of space to go. Well, the car turns out to be a cop. And I was like, all right, well, I did the best I could. There was a hill, I couldn't see it. So I pull over. And then the cop throws on his flashers, throws a U-turn. I'm like, what the fuck? What is he doing? It wasn't a close call, right? So then I'm pulling over and I, roll down the window and I'm like, all right, he's just going to talk to me or something like that. And he was really angry. He's like, what are you doing? Why'd you accelerate? I was like, well, I didn't see you. There's a hill. And he's like, well, you could have crept out. I was like, well, if I crept out, it'd have been more dangerous just because you're coming up. And then he was so angry because I guess he got scared, and then he gave me a ticket. And
interesting.
Okay, so this is nothing compared to what people of color have to deal with. Nothing. It's a minor ticket. It's a minor ticket. It doesn't even fucking matter. But even the injustice of that, which was not based on any race at all, not based on who I was, which is based on him being angry and him responding, the injustice that he had the authority to give me that fucking ticket
because he was angry.
Because he was angry and didn't deserve it. I was hot. I was hot all day. But then I think, all right, in that trivial, insignificant moment, imagine what it would be like to be a person of color and have to deal with that constantly with much more severe consequence and much more frequency, and how that would affect me and how that would affect my worldview. That's something to really take in.
Yeah, it's this theme has come up in a couple of films, I think. I don't recall, but this idea that something that white people or just about anybody that's not a person, well, I'll just say somebody not Black, non-Black people, there's this moment when often parents, the way that other parents think, okay, now it's time to have the birds and bees conversation, right? Black people have to have that moment when I need to let you know something, that you're Black, and that's a problem in the world. I need to, like, a lot of people don't like you for these reasons. And because of that, there's things that you need to be mindful about, right? How you drive your car. If the cops should pull you over, make sure that your hands stay on. Like, what kind of conversations are these that parents have to have with their kids,
Yeah.
right? It's ridiculous, right? So it's almost like, and I had that conversation with my mom in her own way, a moment when she needed to explain something to me from the context of, well, the reason it happened is because you're Black. And as a kid, I was like, I don't understand. Right?
Yeah, of course. Why would a kid understand that?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any fucking sense.
And she had to do her best to let me know, like, well, I know you don't, and I know it's ridiculous, but you still need to know that this is the way other people are seeing you in the world, and there's no way around it. You just have to deal with it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to go back to one point that you made about being of service and how helpful that is. I think one of the things that we all really need as human beings is, meaning. And meaning is the ability to personally affect an outcome that we care about, right? Like, so when it's sometimes very difficult to have meaning and think that you're going to have hope, and it's really hope, right? Hope and meaning are very closely aligned, because hope is a belief that something positive in the future can happen. And if you're participating actively in that process, then you have meaning, But sometimes we're so depressed and so down, and our life is so bleak that it's very difficult to imagine that we could do anything to improve ourselves.
Yeah.
However, it's a lot easier to recognize that we could do something that could help somebody else. And in that case, because there's no way that we can trick our mind to say, there's literally nothing I could do to help any other human on the planet. You have to be really pathological to really believe that. So you can have hope and have meaning just by helping somebody else. And I think that's something that we're seeing. It's very important on the personal level, but I think it's also one of the reasons why this is such a passionate movement is all of a sudden people have meaning.
Oh, wow. You've hit a nail on the head that I think isn't talked about enough. That if you put the protests, the Black Lives Matter movement, in the context of the pandemic, all these people that, out of work, their lives turned upside down, suddenly they're isolated, a lot of them really looking for what motivates me to get out of bed in the morning, right? And then suddenly, like you just said it, like you were given a huge meaning today, a huge purpose. Like, I am now part of this movement, right?
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's really good. And in a lot of ways, I think it's why we see so much of it being confrontational. I think for a lot of people, it may not be that they're really deeply rooted in the history and the significance of the moment. I think it could just be like, that's it. Finally, I found my purpose.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm going to be on the street. I'm going to yell and break windows and do what it takes to kind of like just make a mess. Because you get what I'm saying. I'm exaggerating it, but I think there's a component of that for sure. And the beautiful poetic kind of synchronistic timing in the universe, I remember thinking, because many times there has been incidents that could have sparked what we're seeing now. And they always kind of get, a little fire that gets put out and it smolders for a while. I think what was unique about this one is that the pandemic and the stress of all of that and the isolation, all of it was a perfect like tinderbox. People exploded out of that onto the street. What a contrast.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was something they probably wanted anyways, this kind of compression of being at
Exactly.
home. They're like, okay, now there's something to really
like you said, a meaning, a really valid reason to break out of this story. And,
Yeah.
Yeah. And, the jury's still out on like, how that will affect the pandemic in terms of its cases. Like so far, yes, they're rising, but they would have anyway because the quarantines are starting to end. And so I'll be very curious, like everyone else, to see how it plays out.
Yeah, ultimately. Yeah. Well, if you're up for it, I'd love for you to bless us with a song.
I'd forgotten about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll preface this by saying, I'm mostly known publicly as a just public advocate for plant medicine work. Mainly because I've seen over the years as it transformed so many hundreds of lives. I mean, people just literal life transformations. The other is, and related again to what's happening right now on the planet, is so much of our healing is ancestral healing or needing to be, right? Things that we inherited from our ancestors. And ayahuasca beautifully does that work. It's mostly ancestral work in a lot of ways. And so what mostly moves the ceremony along is the music itself. Right? When I worked with the Shipibo, they said, the guy we were working with said that, he said, we acknowledge that ayahuasca is the true healer, but the Icaros, the music tells it where to go. It like directs the energy. And I really, really like that. So that launched me on a whole journey of sound healing, which is a relatively new field that's gaining ground, the role of vibration and sound and what music does to the brain, that it actually opens up access to memories that might have been lost or suppressed. Obviously, it brings you into emotional states that can get you access to parts of yourself that you maybe wouldn't have access to otherwise. So whether it's like beautiful melodic or kind of dissonant and confrontational, the music still is like a major part of the healing. So I shared that because I started off my quote unquote career thinking that I would just be a musician. I wanted to be an artist. When I discovered ayahuasca and the role that music plays in it, I thought, whoa, game changer. Like this is the only music that I'm now interested in. And then lo and behold, that form of music has now become a genre of music called medicine music. So that's what I focus on. And it's really just music that either comes out of ceremony space or is shared with the intention of helping to facilitate kind of healing work. So I'll share a couple
And it
of
is
those.
unbelievable powerful for anybody who's participated in a ceremony. The music is probably, other than the medicine itself, like they were saying,
It's the most powerful.
the most
yeah.
important thing.
Yeah. For better or worse, as you know. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been in ceremonies like some people where it's like everything was going great until they played that one song.
yeah. Into the bardo you go.
You're like fingernail scratching in the top there. So yeah, the role of music and the responsibility for either choosing good music or playing music appropriate is, I think, in addition to learning to facilitate ceremony, being a ceremony musician is a whole other art form in and of itself, right? And skill that needs to be learned. And so I think that's where most of my study is. So usually at some point in ceremony, I'm playing this drum. It's called a frame drum. A frame drum is basically any drum where the head is much wider than the width of the drum. So tambourines, like all of them are considered frame drums. And apparently they think this might be one of the oldest instruments found through cave paintings, I believe. And it was women that played them initially. Men picked it up later. We traveled far to find this place where weary souls find a warm embrace. We traveled far to find this place where weary souls they find a warm embrace. And all our love, it comes from this place. All our love comes from this place. We traveled far from outer space to bring you love and a warm embrace. We traveled far from outer space to bring you love and a warm embrace. And all our love, it comes from this place. All our love comes from this place. We traveled far from inner space to calm the war with a warm embrace. We traveled far from inner space to calm the war with a warm embrace. And unto you we sing and pray from this place. And unto you we sing and pray from this place. May all our bombs turn into birds and fly away. May all our bombs turn into birds and fly away.
Medicine music.
It's actually a short version.
It's unbelievable, man. It's so powerful. So powerful. And I think one of the things about this type of music, one of the reasons why it's so powerful in ceremony is you're really listening. You're really paying attention. Like ceremony opens up all of your senses. And even now, because the podcast itself is a little ceremony. Like my attention is at some of the highest and most present that it is in any aspect of my life. Because I know that there's a lot of people listening. I'm bringing it and listening the best. The music hits so much deeper when you really give it the space and you really give it the presence to listen, and you're not fidgeting around with other stuff or looking on your phone.
It's amazing, and it's why, the concept of medicine music is really any music that can facilitate a healing process. The difference is you could actually play a pop song in ceremony, but in that place, actually hear what's being shared for the first time. Yeah. You're like, whoa, I never quite understood those lyrics.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about medicine music is that more often than not, you receive the song in the ceremony itself. So it already has this beautiful layer of appropriateness and like profound impact because it's coming out of that space, that one included, I remember thinking like, sort of like cognizing everybody in the room as having made this choice to incarnate and be a part of this healing process, right? Mm-hmm. And in that's where the lyrics came from. It's like, we traveled far from outer space to bring you love and a warm embrace, because that's really all we're really doing in ceremony, right? Mm-hmm. And that is a way to calm the war, metaphorically and oftentimes literally, right? Your friend's having the confrontation and wanting to be in your face, like really good friend of mine who I just love and was so mad at me, and he was just like, literally that close to me, fuck you. And I was like, I love him so much. Right? Really. And it wasn't like I was like putting some spiritual bypass euphemism on top of it. I realized in that moment, like, I really do love him so much. And I feel bad that I've made him mad enough to do that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And just the reaching out and the hugging took care of the whole thing.
Yeah. And also travel far from inner space, and I think that's
crucial.
Something that we all have to recognize, because in that moment he was, lost in a deep part of his inner space. Absolutely. Where anger and all of these things were present. And all of us are locked in these different situations where we're really far from that loving embrace that we can express externally, because we're lost in our own psychological kind of prison that we're in, and our own lost cave, and so to travel far from that
from the internal space. And it's interesting because one of the things I like so much about that particular song is, one of the things you get from ayahuasca is this multi-layered view, obviously perspective of reality, that at any given moment, it's like, well, there's Aubrey and I sitting at the table having a conversation. There's been lots of versions of this. But then if I look closer, it's like, well, actually the entire room is made of the same thing. It's all particles. And the whole thing is conscious. The tiles are talking to, like, you could just go down that rabbit hole endlessly. Mm-hmm. And then like what Nassim Haramein is saying is like that the basis of all reality is just conversation. Like, it's just energy transfer. And the whole thing is in conversation, talking to each other. So I also mean that when I sing the lyrics, like, we've traveled far from inner space too, like that we literally are appearing out of nothing, right? We're appearing out of time and space, somehow evolved to be able to sit and talk about the whole thing. It's like, isn't this great?
How cool,
right?
How cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Totally. And I feel like something we talked about earlier, it's like, you can't rush the healing process. And if I look at like confrontations, for instance, maybe with the protest, it wouldn't be appropriate to stand up at a protest and go, hey guys, on a quantum level, this is all like, That's not going to work.
You'll get the proverbial tomatoes thrown at you.
Exactly, right? We're mad, we're upset, and rightly so. But there is a moment I find in almost any arc of a process, cathartic process or conversation, where that level of awareness can enter the conversation. Mm-hmm. And the perspective you get from ayahuasca with enough years, I think, is knowing when to bring that level of insight into a conversation, right? Because that level of process people go through, it's like, here's this thing that happened to me and it was really painful, and now I'm back in the trauma, and then, oh, I forgive her. And then somewhere at the end of that, ayahuasca reveals and goes, and the whole thing was just a show. It was like, everything's fine.
Yeah.
'Cause I couldn't tell you that earlier, but I can now.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the other thing too that the medicine offers is it's your own voice that
Yeah.
actually ends up telling you. And maybe you can externalize it as ayahuasca told me, and sometimes it does
Exactly.
feel like that, but nonetheless, it's coming through
Still,
in a way
yeah.
that it's not somebody else's opinion that you could discredit. It's like, oh, this is me realizing this for myself, which is just so much more powerful than somebody telling you, anyways.
People ask me very often, one of the common questions is like, is what you experience in ayahuasca real? Like, are the beings real? Is ayahuasca actually an entity? Right.
Mhm.
And my response is, does it matter?
Yeah.
Right.
Same here.
Yeah. And the reason is like, look, it works, right?
Yeah.
It's a technology that works, that consistently brings healing to people. And whether or not, first you'd have to have the conversation about what is real anyway. If you're perceiving it, right, it's being experienced as real to you in that moment. So I feel like ultimately it doesn't actually matter. What does is that if you surrender to the process, we know what's possible on the other side of it. And that's like my main motivation. Going back to like what motivates you to get out of bed in the morning. Like I was sharing with you before we started that of the whole weeks of the quarantine, I was actually pretty active and getting things done, and the introvert in me was just loving it. Right?
Mhm.
But there's one day I was kind of lying on the couch and my roommate came in and wanted something, and I was just kind of like, I got nothing for you. I'm just like, I'm finally going to let myself just be in it.
Yeah.
Just sink into the whole thing and be unmotivated. And I did that for about 6 hours, and I was really glad that I did, because it was a layer of experience that a lot of people were having that I hadn't allowed myself to experience yet, right? It's like the wounded healer kind of thing. It's like, okay, now when the next motivation or mediation call I need to do with somebody, I'm going to remember what this felt like, because I was not feeling it prior to this, but these people have been feeling it for weeks, and that's why they're calling me.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're getting about time to wrap up here, and you have a beautiful handpan, so
let's play a little,
let's give it a little love.
Most people that don't know, the handpan is like a spaceship.
Like a flying saucer.
It's
of
kind of
sound.
like an inverted steel drum, but basically a melodic percussion instrument. For people that are familiar with handpan, this has been around for quite a while. For a lot of people, it's new. This is actually a song for George Floyd. Let's play the beginning of it. I went down to that river to pray. I went down to that river to pray. And I prayed all day. I prayed all day. I took my mama down to that river to pray. I took my father down to that river to pray. Ocean. And we laughed. And danced all day. And we washed our troubles away. Piece of that song.
It's beautiful, man. Rest in power, George.
And I chose those lyrics like you don't need to just speak to the details of a tragedy like that. What instead came to me was the backbone of the African American experience. What always gets our people through is the reliance on this spirituality and this idea of like going to the river, River Jordan, and being there and using the water, connecting with nature and spirit to basically wash your troubles away. So I just have this vision of like, because the last thing he cried out to was his mom. These visions, like that was my kind of visualization of that. It's like you meet your mother and your father, and let's just go down to the river. It's all good. Right?
It was such a powerful part when you talked about them laughing too. It was almost at that point they're the Maya, the illusion
Absolutely.
of the world, all dissipated, and the souls were dancing and laughing.
Yeah, this is a perfect place to close our conversation because this comes up often. Like being at Burning Man or at a rave in my early days, and there'd always be this one kid on the floor that's just cracking up, right? He's taking some drugs or whatever. And I remember like always thinking that was funny. But then I heard some amazing guru, I don't remember which one, he said something to this effect, to wake up from the illusion, oftentimes the only possible response is laughter.
I've been there.
Yeah. And we've had that experience many times where suddenly you go, what the? And you just start laughing at all of it. And I feel like that's where I always try to take myself to, not to bypass the uncomfortable feeling, but in the midst of that, to also maintain like, as a lot of mystics have said, this is all the theater of God.
Yeah, you can look it out at everything with its impossible complexity. And it's so much more than the mind can even comprehend. So when you actually behold everything that you're trying to grapple with and trying to hold on to some semblance of control and you have no chance, the only thing to do at that point is just throw up your hands and laugh.
Just laugh.
And just have faith. Just faith and laughter, which is like, all right.
You've been to the burn.
I have. Met my wife there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Many of my friends and married there. I had that experience my very first burn. I think I went a total of 7 times. And there's this one night, which only people that have been in the burn can relate to. I think we might have taken mushrooms, I don't know. I'm out in the middle of the playa in the center of this, 50,000 people crazy party. And this boat goes by like a full-scale pirate ship with an opera happening and people were swinging. And there's this moment when you suddenly like, it was the entire world. Like, and you're in the middle of a desert at the biggest party ever. And there's opera singers on a ship moving along the sand and amongst everything else, and couples making love. And I just started laughing. I couldn't stop. Right? And I realized that I was laughing not just for that moment, but that all life had kind of crescendoed and could crescendo to that moment of seeing the whole thing as that. Right? It's like, this is crazy. We're all just on this crazy boat floating through space, playing cops and robbers and pirates, and it's absurd. From that perspective, the pale blue dot perspective, the whole thing is absurd. Beautiful, crazy, and at times just laughable.
No doubt. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you. What a treat, finally.
This was amazing. People can find your songs if they're looking for them on Spotify, Bird Tribe.
Yeah, either Bird Tribe, the group name, or Tony Moss. We'll take you to my website, which has a link to all the music. Yeah. And mostly it's a collective, of artists. I'm just kind of representing here today, but it's a group of amazing medicine music artists that all collaborate.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, brother. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Peace. 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 Peace.